Sarah, Abraham's wife, hadn't yet produced a child. She had an Egyptian maid named Hagar. Sarai said to Abraham, God doesn't seem fit to let me have a child. Sleep with my maid or my slave. Maybe I can get a family from her. Abraham agreed to do what Sarai said. So Sarai, Abraham's wife, took her Egyptian maid Hagar and gave her to her husband, Abraham, as a wife. Now, Abraham had been living 10 years in Canaan when this took place. He slept with Hagar and she got pregnant. When Hagar learnt she was pregnant, she looked down on her mistress. Sarai told Abraham, it's your fault I'm suffering this abuse. I put my maid in bed with you, and the minute she knows she's pregnant, she treats me like I'm nothing. May God decide which of us is right. You decide, said Abraham. Your maid is your business. Sarai was abusive to Hagar, and Hagar ran away. An angel of God found her beside a spring in the desert. It was the spring on the road to Shur. He said, Hagar, maid of Sarai, what are you doing here? Where have you come from? And where are you going? She said, I'm running away from Sarai, my mistress. The angel of God said, go back to your mistress, put up with her abuse. He continued, I'm going to give you a big family, children past counting. She answered God by name, praying to the God who spoke to her. You're the God who sees me. Yes, he saw me, and then I saw him. And that's how the desert spring got named, God Alive Sees Me Spring. And that spring is still there today between Kadesh and Bered. Hagar gave Abraham a son. Abraham named him Ishmael. Right, that's good. So we looked in some detail last week at the story of Hagar. I just want to spend a few moments on that one moment in the desert when Hagar encounters the angel. I just see what Joe's put in there. Genesis, Peter, Gabriel, Gabriel, angel. No, that's not how it works. I mean, it's no. Anyway, it was in very, very unsatisfactory circumstances. It wasn't in a church building that this happened. It wasn't in an intense moment of spiritual ecstasy. It's while Hagar was on the run from a harsh mistress. Now, Hagar was by no means a weak character. She knew her worth, and she knew what she was worth to Abraham, having, becoming pregnant with his child, especially as his wife appeared at this point unable to have children. Hagar wasn't some meek, humble, flawless, virtuous woman. That's kind of where traditionally the biblical women have been painted, hasn't it, as these kind of flowers of submission and obedience. That's not Hagar, and neither actually is that Sarai. I mean, I see Hagar when I hear her story, she's practical and she's down to earth and she's realistic and she's willing to set her own destiny as much as she could in the context of the times and her situation. And for her, setting her own destiny meant escaping from slavery, getting away from the situation, even though that meant risking her life and fleeing into the desert. She knew if she was caught, there's a strong chance that they'd kill her or punish her pretty severely. I mean, slavery was different. This is very different to the transatlantic slavery that from more recent times. But still, you were still property as a slave. But Hagar's like, I'm off. I'm not having this anymore. I like her honesty as well. As she flees into the desert and she meets the angel, she's very honest about her reasons. She's not ashamed of why she's going. I mean, if you look at the story of Abraham and Sarah, their behavior, I think, leaves something to be a bit desired at times. Abraham lies about who Sarah is on a couple of occasions to save his own skin. They both treat Hagar as a possession, even though she's clearly part of God's plan. And they know this. But Hagar is bluntly honest when she finds herself in a strange situation, unlike Abraham. I'm running away, she says to this angel she meets at the spring. There in the desert, miles from home, she meets an angel. Now, the road to Shur, which is what she was on, is the route. I had to look this up on a map. It's the route back from back to Egypt from Canaan. So, if you remember, Hagar was a slave that had been given to Abraham and Sarah while they were in Egypt. So, Hagar was going home. She was running back home to the place she knew, the place where presumably she had friends and families. Some of the later traditions say that Hagar was a princess, was an Egyptian princess. I mean, that's not what the biblical story says. But I think some of the Jewish traditions place her as a princess. But either way, she was going home on her own, a woman on her own, traveling through the wilderness, pregnant as well. So just for a moment, try and imagine that encounter by a spring in the desert. We've got no other details, no time of day. We don't know if there are other people around. It kind of strikes me, you know, when you see those films and they're driving these long roads through the desert and they just come across like a motel or a gas station, and it's hot and it's dry and it's dark and the lights are kind of just a bit weird and dim and, you know, fizzing. And they just stop. That's the equivalent. That's the modern equivalent of a spring, isn't it? So that's Hagar in this shack, this stopping point in the middle of nowhere. There she is, pregnant, on the run, her heart set on getting home, and an angel steps in front of her. Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from? Where are you going? And you, where have you come from? Where are you going? In the wilderness, when things are difficult, sometimes we just keep going, don't we? We don't always collapse in a heap. We don't always have a great plan or a strategy to see ourselves out of it. We don't stop and think. We don't pause to reflect. We're so fixed on the destination, on getting through this. Perhaps we lose sight of who we are now. Hagar stopped by a spring, and as she's there, she catches her breath. When her guard is down, God steps in. Now, I know angels are rare. Few people see them, and when people tell you they've seen an angel, generally you're a bit kind of, yeah, all right then, you know. But if you're not sure of the concept, remember that angels are messengers. They aren't necessarily those medieval things with the big wings and the tilted heads and the lack of clothes, just wearing, you know, a few bits of sheeting. Angels are people who bear God's message. It could have just been some grubby, dodgy looking traveler, some nomad sat by his camel who saw Hagar. He says, "Hey, darling, where have you come from and where are you going?" But in that encounter, Hagar, the penny drops, the light bulb goes on, and Hagar hears God's voice. And she knows what to do because she is reminded that she is part of God's plan. Her part in this family chosen by God, she has a part to play. However tough it all is, however unsatisfactory it all is, she's reminded in that sentence, part of something given to her by God. So as we walk in the wilderness, in this COVID wilderness that we're in, pause. Be ready to hear God's voice. Hagar was trying to go back to the old ways, wasn't she? To how things used to be back in Egypt, the security of the past. But God had other plans for her because she too was going to become the mother of nations. Through Ishmael, she too would have as many descendants, an extended family of cousins and relations and friends, as many as there are stars in the sky. Part of the family we're in. We're related to Hagar. So where are you going? The other encounter has the same vibe, although it is different on the surface. We're going to just jump on to Genesis 18 now. Now, some of you will know this story, and it is another delightfully strange story. Genesis 18, if I can find it. Here we go. God appeared to Abraham at the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance of his tent. It was the hottest part of the day. He looked up and saw three men standing. He ran from his tent to greet them and bowed before them. He said, Master, if it please you, stop for a while with your servant. I'll get some water so you can wash your feet. Rest under this tree. I'll get some food to refresh you on your way, since your travels have brought you across my path. They said, Certainly. Go ahead. Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. He said, Hurry, get 3 cups of our best flour, knead it, and make bread. Then Abraham ran to the cattle pen and picked up a nice plump calf and gave it to the servant, who lost no time in getting it ready. Then he got curds and milk, brought them with the calf that had been roasted, set the meal before the men, and stood there under the tree while they ate. The men said to him, Where is Sarah, your wife? She'd become Sarah by this point. He said, In the tent. One of them said, I'm coming back about this time next year. When I arrive, your wife Sarah will have a son. Sarah was listening at the tent opening just behind the man. Abraham and Sarah were old by this time, very old. Sarah was far past the age for having babies. Sarah laughed within herself. An old woman like me get pregnant with this old man of a husband? God said to Abraham, Why did Sarah laugh? Me, have a baby. An old woman like me. Is anything too hard for God? I'll be back about this time next year, and Sarah will have a baby. Sarah lied. Well, compare and contrast to Hagar again. Sarah lied. She said, I didn't laugh, because she was afraid. But he said, Yes, you did. You laughed. What a delightfully weird story that is. The story has got people excited, particularly Christians, right? Because it's a reference to 3 men arriving, 3 angels. And some people, or Christian tradition, has taken this as a precursor of the idea of the Trinity, that God appeared. It's threefold to Abraham and Sarah. It's an intriguing idea, which we're not going to think about this morning, but it is a lovely idea. Instead, let's look at that encounter, the angel meeting in the wilderness. So here they are, Abraham and Sarah, in a sacred place, the sacred oaks of Mamre in the wilderness, just carrying on. Now, we've mentioned before, and particularly during the prayers, midday prayers, we've been looking at this story, and Abraham and Sarah seem to hang around the sacred places. They often would camp there. But there they are, just carrying on. Ishmael had been born by this point. The promise to Sarah still hung in the air. Your wife Sarah will bear a son, and I will keep my covenant with his descendants forever. The promise of God hung in the air, and on the walls of the tent, and in the sky each night, and in the sand under their feet as they walked around. The promise just hung there everywhere they went. It crept in their consciousness with everything they saw. For Abraham and Sarah, this was a wilderness of waiting. And one day, as Abraham is sitting in the porch of the tent, he looks up and he sees three people approaching through the haze, through the glare. And he jumps up and insists they stay. And there's no indication here that he knows who they are at this point, but he shows hospitality, openness, and kindness. And we get that conversation that Sarah listens into. And Sarah laughs. You know, she's a practical woman as well. She's not some kind of saint. Oh, yes, whatever God says. Oh, I believe. She's like, you're having a laugh now, aren't you? Really? Whether she laughs cynically, like, look at me, or whether she just thinks it's funny by this point. After all those promises, after all this trouble they've been through, they've left their land, they've roamed the land of Canaan for years on a promise from God that just never, ever happened. After all that, will it really come about? Yes, it will. Because after all that, God meets Sarah and Abraham in the wilderness and he fulfills his promise to them. God didn't promise no wilderness because life is hard. Life is a desert at times. Life is unfulfilled at times, trackless at times. But that is only part of the story because God has promised he won't forget us. He won't abandon us. He will meet us. We will encounter his angels, his messengers. Now, it's unlikely those angels are going to, it's unlikely they're going to be creatures of flame. But if we have the eyes to see it, we will see God's messengers because we have the promise that Jesus gave us of God's Spirit. So things are different to these Old Testament stories. And we look differently at the world that these matriarchs and patriarchs, our ancestors, saw. The world is different to us now. But one thing I am sure of, and I've seen it again and again in my life and other people's lives around us, is that God still speaks and God is with us and God does not let us go. So pause, look out and listen. Sit at your porch and see who goes by. Because even in the wilderness, we're going to meet God's messengers. Amen. Tell us about your book pile, Neil. Well, thanks for asking, Les. That's a Bible. You may have that. That's the message. It's a nice floppy Bible. There's something about a floppy Bible, isn't there? This is a book of prayers based on great Celtic Christians, which is from it's the community of Aidan and Hilda, which is a kind of old school Celtic sort of community group. And they do some good prayers. We've adapted some of these for our book. I've picked up again the church worship book, so I've started working on that again afresh. The main thing is trying to learn how to use book publishing software. But anyway, that's another learning skill. This is a book about race by Efwa Hirsch, which I've just started reading now. And that's another Bible. That's a different translation. Just to compare and contrast. It's got nice pictures in it, this one. So I like this one. There we are. Oh, no, there's not a picture there. Is there a picture there? There's pictures there. So it's kind of nice. That's it. There's another Bible there. That's just to make them all higher because otherwise they're outside. Yeah, read. If you're not a great reader, find stuff you can read. I've just read a novel called The Kindness of Enemies, which I got for Christmas, which was interesting. I won't give any spoilers on it. It's quite a good book. If anyone wants to borrow that, let me know. I'll send it to you. Yeah, I'm just working through my Christmas book pile. It's good. Linda. And Alan Les knows one of the trustees of the community. He lives in Spark Hill. I didn't know that. Ooh. Well, don't tell him we're stealing their liturgical resources, will you? We have got some. Yeah, I saw the Zoom thing that people have. You can buy. Apparently, you can just buy, can't you, a batch of books to put in the bookshelf behind you. Yes, that's it. That's what Adriana said about supplies books to films. They have an increase in inquiries from the general public. It's like in the pubs, isn't it? They used to, you could buy books by the meter to fill up pub bookshelves, mainly Weatherspoons, isn't it? And sometimes they get an occasionally interesting book. I don't just do it to show off. I mean, partly, yeah. Chris is talking about it over there. Are you just saying I'm that shallow now? Is that what's going on here? Is it? Anyway, what I'm saying is I'm encouraging you to read, everyone, all right? If you can. If you don't like reading, watch films, watch documentaries, keep your brain open, especially at the moment. That way we understand each other better and we understand God better. So I've kind of got a pile of books. Some of them are kind of this sort of thing, like the British book. I've got some novels and I've got some kind of spirituality books, and they're all alternated. I'll try and work my way down them. And I could never be in a book club because that's too much pressure to read it within a certain time frame. So I just kind of take my time. If you like Where's Wally, read Where's Wally, I say. I think you are all saying I just do this to show off, aren't you? Right, I'm going to do it every week now. What with that? And hey, Les, as you started all this, how's that? It's going to start clustering up, isn't it, with books and with that's going to fall off and coffee pots. There'll be something else soon, won't there, that we have to start integrating into the scene. It'll end up with all this clutter around me. Like, if you've seen Matt Hancock when he's interviewed in his red study, his red office, there's all this stuff around. He obviously likes cricket, and he's got all these books. And he's one, and it looks like a toilet. It's only about that wide, his office, but it's painted red. Maybe that's why he's so angry all the time. I don't know. Anyway, Louis Theroux. See, Esther, I know, is a big fan of Louis Theroux. See, podcasts, I've never really got into. I don't have the patience, I think, to sit down and listen. I think if I drove to places more, I'd probably listen. If you knew you had a half-hour drive, I probably would, but I don't ever sit still for that long. I know a lot of people. I know a lot of people. I'm just laughing about all the Where's Wallies. I know a lot of people use podcasts. Yeah. Show and tell. Yeah, perhaps send in your photos of your bookshelves, everyone, with a few comments. In fact, send in a photo of your bookshelves, and I'll share it, right? And everyone's got to guess whose it is. We'll give you some options. So if you send them in this week, direct message them or email me a photo of your bookshelf, and then we'll do a guess whose bookshelf. I'll make a note of that. And it's got to be real. You can't steal someone else's bookshelf. It's got to be books either that you have read or that you intend to read. Okay. Guess whose bookshelf? And if you're not a reader, send us in. Oh, no one's got them anymore. They're DVDs or your albums. Perhaps to do your music. Mind you, no one's got them. People use Spotify, don't they? You could screenshot your Spotify playlist. But we'll start with the books. Send us in a photo of your bookshelf, and we'll do a guess whose bookshelf. I'd like that. That'd be funny. Anyway, come on.